Hey folks, DSJC Woodworking. In this video we're going to be building this miter spline jig. You saw me use it in my last video with that maple and walnut box. So in this video we're going to go ahead and knock this out. Simple scrap piece of 1/2 inch Baltic birch ply, a couple scrap pieces of hardwood, glue, and some screws. If you guys like this video, if you like my content, please hit that thumbs up, hit that subscribe button. Look forward to seeing you on more builds. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get to building. Alright, we're going to start off with the table saw here with the crosscut sled. I just felt the crosscut sled was suitable for this. Because my piece was a little bit too long and too narrow to do it without the crosscut sled. So I'm going to go ahead and set my fence to 20 inches. Because that's how wide I want my rails and my face to be. So after setting the fence to 20 inches, I'll go ahead and move it out of the way. Once I have my piece in place, kind of like a temporary stop block, I'll go ahead and cut my piece down to 20 inches. My crosscut sled is worse for the wear. A few dado stacks have been put through it, so I do need to build a new one. Alright, now that I have the first piece cut down to 20 inches, I'm going to go ahead and cut the second one down here to 20 inches as well. Again, one will be for the face of the miter spline jig, and the other one will be to hug the rails of the miter spline jig. So again, setting it back to 20 inches, I'll go ahead and slide my piece over, setting it in place, and then moving the fence back out of the way and cutting the second piece down to 20 inches. And this will just make sure that the face and the rails are aligned. Now that my second piece is cut down to 20 inches, I'll go ahead and get rid of that scrap piece. Turn off the table saw there, pull the crosscut sled back, and we're good to go. Now I'm going to measure the height of my rip fence. This is important, just make sure everything's snug and aligned. This turned out to be 2 3/8 inches tall. Now that I have that, I'm going to go ahead and set my fence to 2 3/8 inches tall and lock that into place. And I'll make my first cut at 2 3/8 inches. Not all rip fences are the same, so just make sure you measure yours and figure out what the height of it is using a combination square, and you'll be good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and do this here. I'll cut it down to 2 3/8 using the 1/2 inch ply and a push stick, making sure I have downward pressure, make sure there's no kickback, and I'll go ahead and send it home. Now that I have that first piece cut, I'll go ahead and turn off my table saw. Check that first piece for alignment, make sure everything's good, everything's great, and I'll go ahead and send that second piece home. Now I have two pieces cut down to 2 3/8. I'll make sure it's the right height, and then I'm going to check for the width. The width on this turns out to be 4 1/8 inches, so I'm going to go ahead and set my table to 4 1/8, and I will use the gripper to go ahead and cut that. And now that I have my piece cut down to 4 1/8, I'm good to go. And now I'll just, while I'm here, everything's set up, I'll go ahead and cut my face piece down to 10 inches tall. No particular rhyme or reason here, just 10 inches turned out to be a good height for me. And so I'm going to go ahead and cut it down to 10 inches using the table saw. So now that the piece is cut down to 10 inches, we're good to go. So now I'll grab my 3 rail pieces and set them up, making sure that everything is kind of fit, nice and snug, make sure everything's aligned. Alignment front to back is not super crucial, it just looks nice. So I'll go ahead and get ready to send it home. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my glue bot here using Tight Bond 2. I'll go ahead and apply a really thin bead of glue. The glue will dry up over time. I will use screws to pretty much act like a clamp, but I just want some extra durability here, so I will add a thin layer of Type Bond 2 to each side, making sure that I don't have glue squeeze out all over my rail and table saw. So really thin bead of glue, and then I'll go ahead and put the top rail on, kind of slide it into place, making sure that glue really gets into all the nooks and crannies, and push it right into place. And then I'll go ahead and grab some squeeze clamps here, making sure that everything is snug to the fence. Not too snug. You don't want the fence to not be able to move. I maybe did too snug on that front clamp there, but I will go ahead and correct that, as I kind of want things to run smoothly. So I go ahead and put the back clamp in, and then I will check, and everything seemed a little bit tight at the front, so I'll go ahead and bust that loose a little bit, and then realign it and make sure everything's nice and aligned. And once I have everything nice and aligned, I'll go ahead and grab my drill bit here, and I'll go ahead and pre-drill, make sure I don't blow out my plywood here. Pre-drill some holes. I did about 4 holes on each side. You can do maybe a little bit more. I wouldn't recommend anything less. 4 just seemed like the right thing to do, and I've done it a few times. So go ahead and send those screws home, and now I have a nice free moving fence. Once I have that, I'll go ahead and go to my face piece, and I'll go ahead and mark the center of the board, a 20-inch board. 10 inches is right in the center. I'll grab a carpenter square, and I'll put the tip of the carpenter square right up to that mark, making sure it's dead center. I'll go ahead and use a speed square, and making sure that that carpenter square is at 45 degrees. And it wasn't at first sight, so I'll go ahead and make some adjustments, making sure everything's locked in at 45. I have one side set to 45. Theoretically, the other side should be set to 45, but just in case, I'm going to go ahead and double check that. Flip the square around, making sure it's set there. While holding that carpenter square into place, I'm going to go ahead and grab some clamps and clamp that square to the face of my miter spline jig. I want to make sure that that thing's locked in center. Holding the carpenter square down, I'll send the other clamps home, squeezing them nice and tight to my table here, and then double check and make sure I didn't get out of alignment, which I didn't. So everything's nice and square, 45 degrees, and I'm good to go. So now I'll grab a couple pieces of scrap hickory I had laying around. As long as you're using a good scrap hardwood, everything should be good. I want to set these to 2.5 inches above the tip of that carpenter square, above the base of the bottom of that fence. So I'm going to use some 2P10. I'll try and show you here, but I didn't quite. But 2P10 CA glue. I'll apply a nice little bead of glue. I want to make sure I don't have squeeze out on this, because I could super glue my carpenter square to my face piece. So I just want to make sure I have a nice little bead of glue. I'll use the 2P10 activator and spray that along where I'm going to place my holder. So I'm making sure that this is 2.5 inches above. Fortunately, the carpenter square has those marks, so making sure everything's locked in place, everything's square, and I'll go ahead and set that in place, and it cures in about 3 seconds, maybe less. Second piece, I'll go ahead and apply a nice bead of glue kind of off camera there, and then I'll go ahead and spray that activator again right along where I want to place it, and I'll put it at 2.5 inches above that. Rock it right into place, and it's good to go. It really doesn't take much time to cure. I can safely remove my carpenter square here. and we're good. And I just want to double check, make sure everything's still at 45. I'll put my speed square up, and it is absolutely perfect. So those are set nicely in place, and now I can securely fasten them to the face with some screws. So I'm going to pre-drill a couple of holes here. I'll do 4 on each piece. I couldn't find my countersink bit, so I just kind of had to do this until I figured out what I needed to do to countersink them. Not super important. It just makes things seem a little bit nicer. I did find my countersink bit, and so I went ahead and countersunk those screw holes. And after that, I went ahead and sent some screws home using just standard drywall screws. Not too important. My sleds don't take too much abuse, so this should be just fine. And now that those are sent in, I'm going to go ahead and pre-drill and countersink some holes along the bottom. This is how I'm going to attach the face of my miter spline jig to the rails. You want to make sure that you're just above or below actually the height of the miter spline jig, so you're safe. You're not sending screws through into the middle of nowhere. Now that I have everything kind of pre-drilled and pre-sunk, I'm going to go ahead and just check for alignment here. Everything looks good. And now I'm going to apply a bead of glue across the bottom of this. Again, small bead, just kind of get it everywhere. You don't want too much squeeze out. You don't want squeeze out all over your table saw. It's going to be a pain to clean up, and it will rust your cast iron top. So just be diligent, be mindful. Make sure you get glue everywhere, but not too much. You don't want too thick set of glue. You just kind of want glue everywhere. So once I have the glue everywhere, I will go ahead and use my finger to spread it about, making sure that it's not too thick where it's going to squeeze out all over the place. You'll feel it, you'll see it, and you'll know if it's too much. So I know it's not too much. I'm just going to go ahead and keep spreading it about, making sure I get in between all the screw holes, and I'll go ahead and set my face up to my rails. Once my face is up to my rails, I'll go ahead and use some squeeze clamps, making sure that I'm nicely aligned, making sure that I'm square to that face. Use the squeeze clamps, making sure I'm not covering the holes of where I need to screw. But I'm really only going to send a few screws home here. I don't need to send them all home. It's just an awkward angle. No need to do them all, but I just want to make sure that my fence is square and flush. So I'm going to put 2 screws right here in the middle. I drilled 3 holes in the middle, but I'm only going to put 2 screws here for now. And then I'll go ahead and put one here on the right side as we're looking at it, making sure that that's seated nicely. And then I'll go ahead and put one here on the left side, making sure that that is also seated nicely. And then once I have those screwed home, I can go ahead and remove it, taking those clamps off and taking the spline jig over to my table to where I can put the rest of the screws. The face shouldn't move away from the rails at this point, so I'm just going to go ahead and send the rest of the screws home. I'm going to turn this up to warp speed for you guys so you don't have to be too bored. And now that everything's sent home, I'm going to go ahead and apply some paste wax to the inside rail. It just helps everything move smoothly and freely. Great investment here. I use it on all my jigs. I use it on my joiner, my table saw, my chop saw, just to make sure everything moves nicely. I'm going to go ahead and put it on the top of the fence as well. Just make sure it rides nicely on the top. And then I'll go ahead and put it on the inside face of my jig here. Again, just covering all sides. Not too much, but making sure that everything is going to run nicely. As you can see here, after the paste wax no resistance. Everything is running smoothly. It doesn't rock back and forth. And then here I'm just using a makeshift box to show you that it is running nice and smoothly. Alright, and that concludes this build. Thanks for watching. Hit that thumbs up, hit that subscribe button if you already haven't. Stay tuned for more builds. We're going to go ahead and have Peyton send us away with a joke again.
I had a joke about construction, but I'm still working on it.